Hi, this is Anthony. Thanks for coming back to my channel. Let's jump right into viewers' comments and questions. This one is from Jason, a longtime viewer and commenter, asking about Joe Lockridge. I may in the future look at that candidate in more detail, but at this point there's a number of reasons why I'm not going to, in particular other time commitments, plus some other reasons that I may talk about in the future, but they don't really have any bearing on the candidate in particular, just some of the research and analysis behind that case. In the video that's being referenced upon, in it I mentioned that on the face of it he looks like a good candidate. What few photos seem to exist of him from long ago are a pretty good match. He certainly would seem to have a good motive to a degree, that being that his daughter had been a hostage, recently killed by the FBI in a shootout. And when I say recently, I mean prior to the Cooper skyjacking. And as we all know, Cooper told the flight attendant that he had a grudge, but not a grudge against her airline. But let's think about that a little further. Let's say that you got screwed out of $200,000 by a company or maybe the government through an eminent domain action where the government took your family farm for less than what you thought it was worth so that they could build a freeway through it. Might that be a reason why you'd try to recoup some of the value that you lost? In my mind, that would seem to be a logical action for some people to take. But the argument that people make with Joe Lockridge and certain other candidates is that they were trying to punish or embarrass the FBI. If Lockridge really wanted to enact revenge against the FBI, wouldn't anonymously sending a bomb to FBI headquarters or doing something that causes clear mass confusion within the FBI be a more logical action rather than making a near suicidal jump out of a plane and hoping that you get away with it so that the FBI doesn't solve it, and therefore in some people's minds the FBI is embarrassed about their failure to solve the case? I know there are some armchair Cooper researchers that assume that the FBI must really be embarrassed because this case wasn't solved, but with the exception of perhaps Ralph Himmelsbach, the FBI was too busy dealing with actual ongoing crimes and societal disruptions in the years after the Cooper skyjacking. With all of the race riots and ROTC and university bombings and discontent over the Vietnam War and then Watergate, the FBI had their hands full with plenty of other things, even though if you read the files that they've released, you see that they were trying to chase down all kinds of leads. So that's one thing. I don't think that a person in his situation who's married is going to have the motive to carry out a skyjacking. Plus, after the skyjacking, he and his wife sued the FBI for the wrongful death of his daughter, and they got a large cash settlement. And so I don't think this candidate fits the profile of the type of people that we know skyjack planes or hijack semi-trucks or rob banks. Lockridge didn't seem to have a criminal background, and since he survived past 1971, it's unlikely that he retained the money from the skyjacking and spent it, since none of it showed up in circulation. So the last part of your comment concerning Cooper asking for, quote, negotiable American currency struck me and others as being very odd. What else was he expecting that the payout of the ransom would be as? I think what is also interesting is that he did not think in advance of what denominations he should ask for. It is not hard to figure out how much space $200,000 would take up in various denominations, and the less banknotes you had, the easier they would be to handle when parachuting. Obviously, $100 bills would have been much easier to handle jumping out of the plane, although they might have been more difficult in trying to pass into circulation, assuming that the skyjackers survived and retained the ransom. But certainly a good observation concerning the phrasing that Cooper used when requesting the money. And quite frankly, it could have been purposefully phrased that way to sow some doubt as to whether he was an American or not. Okay, let's move to the next question. This one is also from Jason Bourne and asks about the money found by Brian Ingram on Tina Bar in 1980. The figure that one generally sees was $5,800, but if one Googles the name Cooper and $5,880, you get a number of hits with that figure. And of course, in lots of cases, articles state that $6,000 was found. And when you start looking at the Google results showing articles, just looking at them on the screen, you can see that many of the writers of those news reports nearly copied verbatim other reporters' information, but then just changed words to synonyms. But the structure is the same. And of course, if somebody initially has erroneous information, then it gets repeated over and over and over again. And it's not just reporters copying reporters who are getting their information from potentially erroneous FBI press releases from 1980. Researching your question, I know that when some of the money was sold at auction, the auction house reported that unknown bills were still stuck underneath what was turned over to them for sale. I couldn't find that particular quote at this time, although I haven't spent much time looking for it. But again, it reinforces that we do not know for a fact exactly how many specimens remain that represent unique banknotes from the ransom. However, what I did find today, and this is a bit astonishing, is that what is posted on the Heritage Auctions website, and they're a fairly well-respected auction house, is that clearly there are fragments of one of the bills that are stuck to larger fragments that may or may not be from the same $20 Federal Reserve note. And the promotional information about the note references the portrait on the $20 bill as being Hamilton rather than Andrew Jackson, who of course is the actual individual depicted on $20 bills from that time. Again, that error doesn't change anything about the Cooper case, but demonstrates how sloppy so many things connected to this case are, from the FBI to reporters to the auction house and perhaps even to later researchers. So coming full circle to your question about the exact amount, I don't know if we can say for certain exactly how many unique banknotes were found. But from a practical point of view, it ultimately probably doesn't matter if it was $5,800 or $5,880. The difference in amount isn't really going to include or exclude a candidate or tell us exactly when and where the money entered the water or the sand on the beach at Tina Bar. But some good observations, thank you. So here's a comment from Chad Triplett concerning a correction about what I said about Chael Sonnen, who Mr. Triplett correctly points out that I was incorrect in stating that Mr. Sonnen was a professional wrestler. He's rather a mixed martial artist. I strive for accuracy and I don't want to have incorrect information, so thank you for the correction there. Although if one further wants to elaborate on that, according to his Wikipedia page, he did intend to become a professional wrestler by attending a tryout for the World Championship Wrestling at the WCW Power Plant in the summer of 1998. But the reason that I bring him up is that he's made statements on various YouTube videos where he states that he knows the identity of the man we call D.B. Cooper. I think that we can all agree that Mr. Sonnen is known as a trash talker. You see that referred to by interviewers that have interviewed him. You see that on his Wikipedia page. And so I think that we should be very cautious in accepting anything he says about a crime that took place a good half decade before he was born. As far as other evidence from his bona fides, the commenter mentions that he is a compassionate Republican and a former politician. That's not really true. He started to run for a spot in the Oregon House of Representatives, but then quickly dropped out under mysterious circumstances, which has not been elaborated to the satisfaction of state party officials or other people to this day. As far as getting a sociology degree from the University of Oregon, that certainly is an accomplishment, but I'm also an undergrad and graduate of the University of Oregon. My degrees are in political science, and I would just say that political science, sociology, and psychology are considered to be about the three easiest degrees to obtain, so typically you have a lot of athletes who major in those disciplines. As a former graduate teaching fellow in political science, I can tell you that there's an extensive network within the athletic department mobilized behind getting athletes to pass classes using whatever means necessary, so one should be cautious when accepting that certain people are fully competent in the coursework ascribed to a particular major that they've graduated in. So I just be cautious, or caution anybody listening to what Mr. Sonnen has to say about the D.B. Cooper case. After watching a number of his videos in preparation for this answer, I would say that if one wants to listen to somebody spout off a bunch of nonsense about the D.B. Cooper case, you'd be better off listening to Dan Gryder. Okay, here's a comment from Dan Stafford saying that the Columbia was searched and the body of a woman was found. Now, I don't want to read in too much here as far as what Mr. Stafford means to say, but I think that a lot of people would use that reasoning to argue that since Cooper's body was not found, he therefore did not end up in the Columbia and die there, which I, as well as the FBI, believe is likely. It could be that his chute did not open, or even if it did and he landed and drowned in the Columbia. This is a heavily trafficked area as far as barges and large ships. Many people have speculated that a passing ship's propeller could have caught his parachute and removed the body from that area. Remember, just because we don't have a body doesn't mean that somebody didn't die. We haven't found the body of Jimmy Hoffa. Does that mean he's still alive? No, of course not. If you've watched any number of my videos, you'll see that Mr. John Hancock is a frequent contributor to the comment section, generally accusing me of unspecified malfeasance when it comes to the study of the D.B. Cooper case. Here he says that there are a great many people who want this case to publicly remain a mystery. Their motives are less than honorable, with profit, fame, and self-adulation being their goal. Here I'm sure that he's referring to me in particular, and probably also to Eric Ulis and Dan Gryder. However, I think that this is probably the farthest thing from the truth. My channel is not yet monetized, although I've stated that that's my goal. I've also pointed out in previous videos that if my channel was monetized, that it would likely make a minimum of about $4 a month in ad revenue. Now, I live in the state of Oregon where cans and bottles are returnable to the grocery store for a dime a piece. I can tell you that I would make far more money walking along the side of the highway, picking up cans and bottles and returning them for money than I would make from the same amount of time making YouTube videos about Dan Cooper. As far as Mr. Ulis and Mr. Gryder, I do not believe that their channels are monetized, and both of them have individual candidates that they push as the true identity of D.B. Cooper. So each of them are working towards solving the mystery, not prolonging it. In fact, I think everybody interested in the case would love to have the case solved to everyone's satisfaction so that we can move on from this bottomless pit. So let's move on to the next question. Anne Lisette writes about the Somerton Man case from Australia. I agree with everything she says here 100%. I've actually discussed that case in connection with the Cooper case as well as other cases because I think that it's very illustrative of the problems of coming to conclusions based on potentially misleading clues. I'm not going to read everything that she writes, but here's a screenshot of her message, and then I've pasted it into 2 slides to make it easier for my viewers to read. If you don't know about the Somerton Man case, of course, please watch my videos about it, but there are also many excellent videos that you can find on YouTube and a pretty good Wikipedia article about it. One thought that I will say about the clothing that Cooper was wearing, I agree with you that it was at least a near suicidal jump that he made. People will argue about this. They'll argue about the weather being pleasant, but all the news reports, including government weather data that you can look up yourself, indicated that it was a cold, windy night, and on that day, they had experienced a good amount of rain and a lot more rain the next day. Cooper was jumping out of the back of a plane that was headed south, so he was facing north. So it makes sense that he would jump over a populated area so that he would know where he was because he would have lights visible, plus he would need to get out of the region or at least to get home. I personally think that he probably was from this area. I think that there's a good possibility, although not a likelihood, that he may not have intended to survive the jump. Certainly it's not out of the realm of possibility that he landed in the Columbia River. That being said, would he wear his regular business suit for such a jump? I think that the particles on the tie indicate that he had some connection to the aerospace or high-tech industries. I believe that the tie probably belonged to Cooper prior to the flight. Can we say for 100% certainty that it belonged to him long-term previous to the flight? No, but let's say that it belonged to him. Some have speculated that he was an engineer. That could be true, but I think that it's entirely likely that he could have been some type of government inspector, a safety inspector or something like that would take him to many various types of high-tech and or aerospace manufacturing facilities. That would account for the various substances found on his tie. What about his suit? If he was a businessman in a corner office, he might have an expensive suit. But if he was a person, or if that was the case, then the person probably isn't going to be committing a skyjacking. If he was a government inspector or an engineer, he probably had a cheap suit. I think for somebody that was going to skyjack a plane for $200,000, they know there's 3 options. 1, that they end up not surviving, in which case it doesn't matter what suit he's wearing. 2, he survives but loses the money. Or 3, he survives and keeps the money. In the first and last case, it doesn't really matter if he's wearing his own suit, even if it's a nice suit, because he's either dead or he has $200,000 and can buy a new suit. In the second case, he loses the money but survives. Maybe his suit gets torn up a bit, but he still is thankful to be alive. So I don't think that we should read too much into the suit, especially since we don't have it to examine. We all see the controversy over the tie and what was found on it. That is certainly not a clear-cut conclusion at this point, so speculating on other things based on the reported look of the suit is even potentially more dangerous. But thank you for your comments. I think that it's very important to realize that when you look at other cases, the clues do not always lead to the truth. And in the Cooper case, there are so many contradictory pieces of information that we need to be very cautious when identifying candidates or even believing that the information is 100% correct. Okay, I received a lot more comments, but I think that I'll end here and get this video uploaded before I move on to the next one. Again, thank you to everybody who watches my videos and comments, and especially to those who have subscribed and hit the like button. I do truly appreciate it. Thank you.